I'm Milena, and until my 30th birthday, the most exciting part of my life was when the accounting firm I worked for decided to switch from PC to Mac. Yeah, not exactly headline stuff. But then, at a friend's birthday bash, everything changed. That night, I stood at the corner of a cramped living room, clutching a soda and feeling awkward in my too tight dress. The music was loud, way too loud for conversation, but apparently just right for him, Mark. He was a head taller than most, which was probably why he spotted me. He sauntered over with a confidence that made my heart skip. "Hey, you're Milena, right?" His voice was clear, even over the thumping bass. Yeah. And you are?" I sipped my drink, trying to look calmer than I felt. "Mark. I've seen you around. Mind if I join you?" He didn't wait for an answer, just took it as a given and stood next to me. "Not at all," I said, my voice nearly lost to the latest pop hit blaring through the speakers. "So, Milena, what brings you here tonight?" He leaned in, his tone casual, but his eyes intense. "Just here to celebrate Sarah's birthday. You know her long?" "Yeah, went to college with her. She keeps inviting me to these things." He shrugged. "Can't say no, can I?" We laughed, and it felt natural, easy. "I get it. I work with her. She's kind of hard to say no to." "An accountant, right?" she mentioned. He nodded like he knew all along. "That's right. Numbers are my game," I joked, though I usually found nothing funny about spreadsheets. "Sounds thrilling." He grinned, and I couldn't tell if he was mocking me or not. "Oh, absolutely. It's all wild parties and high stakes in the accounting world." We laughed again, and that's when I felt it, the ease of talking to someone who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. It was a new feeling, exciting and a bit scary. "You want to grab some air?" he suggested, tilting his head towards the backyard. I nodded, grateful to escape the noise. Outside, the cool air was a relief. "So, what's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" I asked, trying to sound smoother than I felt. "Just looking for a good time, I guess. And maybe someone cool to hang out with," he said with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. We talked about everything and nothing, movies, books we liked, how he was into graphic design but stuck at a corporate gig he didn't love. It was as if we'd known each other for years. As the night wound down, he pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? I'd really like to see you again, Milena." I hesitated, not used to this kind of attention, but something about him felt right. "Sure," I said, punching my number into his phone. He smiled, his whole face lighting up. "Great. I'll call you. We should go out, just the two of us." "Sounds good," I managed, my stomach doing flips. I watched him go, a part of me still in disbelief that this was my life now. Maybe turning 30 wasn't so bad after all. Maybe it was just the start of something truly great. The days after Mark's call felt like a blur. Before I knew it, I was getting ready for our first date. My nerves were all over the place. It wasn't like I had much experience in this department. I chose a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but hoped it did the trick. Mark picked me up at 7 sharp. His car was a clean, well-kept sedan, nothing flashy, but it suited him. As I got in, he flashed me a smile that could knock you sideways. "You look great, Milena." "Thanks," I mumbled, my face probably red as a tomato. "You look nice too." Dinner was at this cozy little Italian place he knew. The food smelled amazing, but my stomach was doing somersaults. We ordered pasta, him with some fancy sauce and me with plain old marinara. "So, Milena, tell me something about you that no one else knows," he said, twirling his spaghetti expertly onto his fork. I chuckled, playing with my food more than eating it. "Well, I'm pretty boring. But I guess not everyone knows I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under 1 minute." He raised his eyebrows. "Really now? That's pretty cool. You'll have to show me sometime." "Sure," I said, starting to relax a little. "What about you? Any hidden talents?" "I make a mean breakfast burrito," he boasted with a grin. "Best you'll ever have." "I'll take your word for it. Maybe you can prove it sometime, I teased. The conversation flowed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We saw each other constantly. Mark would come over after work, where I'd meet him for lunch near his office. He introduced me to his favorite spots around town, little nooks I'd never noticed before. It was like seeing the city for the first time. Things took a serious turn when he invited me to meet his parents, Jack and Mary. They lived in a small but cozy house filled with photos and knickknacks. Mary hugged me the second we walked in. "Oh, we've heard so much about you, dear," she said, squeezing my shoulders. "Mark, she's lovely." "Thanks, Mom," Mark said, and I could tell he was pleased. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was nonstop. "So, Milena, Mark tells us you're an accountant. That must be interesting," Jack said, passing me the potatoes. "It has its moments," I replied. "Mostly just numbers, but I like the order of it." "And how's your family?" Mary asked, genuinely interested. "They're good, thanks. My dad's a businessman, always busy, but he's been really supportive of me." It was all happening fast, sure, but it felt right. It was as if everything in my life had been leading up to this, meeting Mark, feeling like someone finally saw me for who I was, not just some plain Jane accountant. One evening, a few months into our whirlwind romance, we were walking along the riverbank. The city lights reflected off the water, and it was pretty, in a postcard kind of way. "Milena, I've been thinking," he started, stopping and facing me. "Yeah?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "I don't want to wait any longer. I know this is fast, but, will you marry me?" Just like that, my world changed. No hesitation, no doubt, just a simple, "Yes, Mark. I'll marry you." The whirlwind didn't stop there. Soon after, I introduced Mark to my father. He took to Mark immediately, appreciating his straightforward manner and obvious affection for me. "He's a good man, Milena," Dad said, giving his approval, which meant the world to me. So, we got married. It was a modest wedding, nothing too extravagant, but it was perfect for us. I even found myself loving the way I looked in my wedding dress, something I'd never imagined. Smiling wide, I posted photos on my social media, sharing my joy with friends and family. After the wedding, life didn't slow down, it picked up pace. Mark and I barely had time to savor our newlywed bliss, before he suggested something big. "Hey, Milena, I've been thinking," he said one evening as we unpacked another box of wedding gifts in our cramped apartment. "How about we move in with my folks?" I paused, a coffee mug in hand. "Live with your parents?" He nodded, looking serious. "Yeah, they're not getting any younger, and I'd feel better if we were around to help out. Plus, it would save us some money on rent." It made sense, I guess, but moving in with the in-laws? That was sitcom territory. "Are you sure they'd want us there all the time?" "Absolutely," he assured me. "Mom's been hinting about it ever since we got engaged. Come on, it'll be good." So, 2 weeks later, there we were, pulling up to his parents' house with our lives packed into a bunch of boxes. Mark's mom, Mary, was waving from the porch before we even got out of the car. "Oh, Milena, we're so thrilled to have you both here," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was a bit too tight. Jack, Mark's dad, clapped him on the back. "Welcome home, son. And you too, Milena." The house was cozy, stuffed with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum of the 1970s. I tried to keep a smile on my face, but I was already missing our little apartment. Mark sensed my hesitation. "It's gonna be great, you'll see," he whispered as we carried boxes inside. The first few days were an adjustment. Mary was constantly hovering, always popping into our room to ask if we needed anything. "Just making sure you're comfortable," she'd chirp, while I tried not to cringe at the invasion of privacy. One evening, we all sat down for dinner, Mark, me, Jack, and Mary. The conversation was painfully mundane until Mark dropped another bomb. So, the house needs some major repairs, he announced casually between bites of meatloaf. I choked on my mashed potatoes. Repairs? Yeah, the roof's a mess, and the plumbing's from the dark ages, he said. Jack nodded solemnly. We were thinking, Mark continued, avoiding my gaze, that maybe we could all chip in for the costs? I glanced at Mary, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. All of us? Well, I just got this pay cut at work, Mark muttered. So I'm a bit strapped at the moment. There it was. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I'll see what I can do, I managed to say, even though I wanted to say much more. Mary perked up, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, Milena, that would be so helpful. You're such an angel. The next few weeks were a blur of contractors and repairs. I wrote checks and smiled through gritted teeth as Mary gushed about how wonderful the house was looking. Jack slapped me on the back. You're really part of the family now, Milena. Part of the family, sure. The part that pays for everything. One particularly grueling day, after yet another round of expensive decisions, I collapsed on our bed, exhausted. Mark came in and sat beside me. Thanks for handling all this, Milena, he said, sounding almost sincere. It's fine, I lied, staring at the ceiling. Just didn't realize how much it would be. He squeezed my hand. It'll all be worth it. This is for our future, right? Our future, I echoed, not quite sure whose future we were building anymore. As I lay there, listening to Mark's steady breathing, I couldn't help but wonder if moving in was the right decision. But there was no going back now. I was in this deep, and I had to see it through, whatever the cost. After the renovations, the house looked great, like something out of a magazine. Honestly, despite the financial strain, I felt a bit of pride looking around. We decided to throw a small dinner party to celebrate, just the four of us. That's when everything took an unexpected turn. We were in the middle of dinner, laughing and sharing stories, when Mary suddenly got quiet. The room felt heavy all of a sudden. She looked at Jack, then at us, and her eyes were teary. We need to tell you both something important, she said, her voice shaky. Mark and I exchanged looks. What's going on? I asked, my stomach tightening. Jack took a deep breath. The house, it's mortgaged. Heavily mortgaged. We owe $200,000, and the bank could take it away if we don't settle the debt in 2 months. My fork clattered to my plate. What? You mean all the repairs we just paid for? Mary started sobbing. We were ashamed, and we thought we could manage it. But after the repairs and everything, there's just no way. I felt like I was in a bad dream. All the money, all the effort, it was for a house that wasn't even secure. So what are you saying now? My voice was sharper than I intended. Well, Mark started, his eyes avoiding mine. I was hoping, maybe, Milena, you could talk to your father. Are you serious? I snapped, my voice rising. Ask my dad for $200,000? It's just, after his help, the house would be secure. For us, for our future, Mark pleaded. Mary's sobbing grew louder, making me feel like the villain in this crazy drama. Please, Milena. It's our home. We've spent decades in this house. I was furious, but the tears and the pleading wore me down. I'll think about it, I finally muttered, feeling trapped. The next day, I called my dad, hesitantly explaining the situation. To my surprise, he agreed to help, but on one condition. I'll give the money, Milena, but only with a formal agreement, a receipt. I want everything documented. When I relayed this to Mark, he wasn't happy. Why does it have to be so formal? Can't he just trust us? It's $200,000, Mark. It's a lot of money, and he's just being cautious, I argued, feeling the divide between us grow. He'll get his paperwork, Mark muttered, clearly annoyed. The paperwork was drawn up, and the money was transferred. Mary and Jack were relieved, constantly thanking me, but the air between Mark and me had changed. There was a coldness that wasn't there before. Just when I thought my life couldn't get any darker, tragedy struck with brutal suddenness. "Milena, it's your Aunt Judith." Her voice came through the line, shaky and choked. "Your dad, he had a heart attack. It's bad." My heart dropped to my stomach. "What? How? Is he?" "He didn't make it, honey. I'm so sorry." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "No, that can't be right," I mumbled, numb. I hung up and turned to find Mark standing in the doorway. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "My dad, he's gone," I managed to say before everything inside me broke and I started sobbing. Mark came over and put his arm around me, but it felt like being hugged by a stranger. "I'm sorry, Milena," he said, and it sounded sincere, but I was too lost in my grief to really hear him. Exhausted from another long day of funeral planning and negotiations with the agency, I came home earlier than usual. I expected the house to be quiet, but as I inserted my key into the front door, I heard voices from the living room. It was Mark, his tone dripping with frustration and disgust, talking to his parents. "I can't do this anymore. Living with her is driving me nuts. She's just, ugh, it's too much," Mark complained. His mom, usually so sweet and understanding, replied in a stern whisper, "You have to hold on a bit longer, Mark. We need to figure out what to do with those receipts your father-in-law had. Milena has them now. The sooner I get out, the better. I'll grab those receipts and destroy them. And then I'll start all over again with that rich beauty I told you about." Mark's voice was cold, calculated. I felt a chill run down my spine. Here I was, mourning my father, while the people I lived with were plotting behind my back. They weren't the loving family I thought I married into. Instead, they saw me as nothing more than a means to an end, a way to secure their financial troubles. Rage mixed with shock, but I knew I had to keep my cool. So, I slammed the door loudly, as if I had just come in, disrupting their scheming. "Oh, Milena. You're back early. How did everything go with the funeral plans?" Mary's voice shifted instantly to one of concern, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I forced a smile, my stomach turning. "It's all coming together. Thanks for asking." As I spoke, I could see the quick glances they shot each other, their faces a mask of fake concern. It made my skin crawl knowing their true colors, but I realized that showing my cards now wouldn't help. I needed to be smart. I needed to protect what was mine, and possibly even get some justice for their deceit. The funeral was somber, the air heavy with grief and murmured condolences. But as the ceremony wrapped up and we returned to Mark's parents' house, the true colors of the family I married into began to show. As we gathered in the living room, sipping on lukewarm coffee, Mark's demeanor shifted. His usually charming facade crumbled away, revealing something more sinister. With a cold laugh, he looked straight at me and dropped the bomb. "Milena, pack your things. You need to get out. I've got someone else now, someone better." His words should have been like a slap. I pretended to be stunned, but before I could respond, Mary chimed in with a snide giggle. "We've really had enough of you, dear. We only put up with you for your money." "What about the house?" I asked, feigning innocence. "The house that I paid to fix, the $200,000 I poured into it?" Mary laughed harder, as if I'd told the best joke of the year. "Oh, sweetie, this house is ours. You're nothing here." Mark's smirk widened. "And those receipts you're so proud of? Found them in your dad's house and burned them. They're gone." For a moment, I let them believe they had won. But then, I couldn't help it, I burst into laughter. My reaction confused them, their smiles faltering. "Why are you laughing? What's so funny?" Mark demanded. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. "You three are just pathetic. You think you're so clever. The receipts you destroyed? They were copies. The real ones are safe with my lawyer." The color drained from both their faces. Mark's arrogance turned to panic. "You can't prove anything," he stammered. I can, and I will, I shot back, my voice steady and firm. Now, I want my money back, all of it, or my next call is to the police. Mark and Jack looked at each other, their earlier confidence replaced by fear. Jack, usually so bold and brash, began to plead. Milena, please, let's talk about this. We can sort something out. With the truth now out in the open and the leverage squarely in my hands, the negotiations with Mark and his parents dragged on longer than I expected. It was clear they were trying every angle to sway the terms in their favor, but I wasn't about to budge. Look, it's simple, I stated firmly during one of our numerous discussions at their, now legally mine, kitchen table. The house gets transferred to my name in exchange for the IOUs. That's the deal. No more games. Finally, they relented. We all agreed that the best course of action was to make everything official and legal. I insisted that everything be documented by a lawyer and confirmed with the proper papers. I want no corners cut, I emphasized. At the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense as documents were signed and notarized. I watched closely as each signature was applied, ensuring there was no room for further deceit. Once everything was finalized, I collected the documents related to the transfer and turned to Mark's mother, who looked deflated yet somehow still carried a hint of her former haughtiness. I'll be keeping these in a safe place, I said, holding up the papers before slipping them into a folder. Just to ensure no one is tempted to pull any stunts. With the legalities handled, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Mark was quiet, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be seen. When the final papers were signed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a chapter closed. On the day they moved out, I stood on the porch of my now fully owned house and watched. Mark, his mom, and dad carried their belongings to a rental van, their movements slow, the mood somber. I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't how I imagined my marriage ending, but under the circumstances, it was the best possible outcome. After everything settled down and I began to enjoy my newfound peace, word got back to me through friends about Mark and his predicament. Apparently, the grass wasn't greener on the other side, his mistress had dumped him not long after our divorce. And his parents? They were now crammed into a tiny apartment, a stark downgrade from the comfortable house they once had. It seemed karma had caught up with them quicker than I expected. Despite their situation, they started reaching out to me, bombarding me with calls and messages, probably hoping to weasel their way back into my life, or at least my house. But I was done with their deceit. I blocked their numbers without a second thought and blacklisted them on all social media. It was liberating, cutting the final threads that connected us. One afternoon, as I was enjoying a quiet moment with a book in my living room, a knock came at my door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Mark standing there, a pathetic figure, holding a bouquet of flowers. The audacity of it made me scoff. Opening the door, I couldn't help but laugh outright at the sight of him. Really, Mark? Flowers? He shuffled uncomfortably, the bouquet seeming to wilt along with his spirits. Milena, I've realized so many things. I was wrong, terribly wrong. Remember when you told me I disgusted you? I interrupted, leaning against the door frame, not bothering to hide my amusement at his discomfort. What changed, Mark? Run out of options? He looked down, the shame clear on his face. I made mistakes. But I'm here to make things right. I shook my head, almost feeling sorry for him. Almost. You're not here to make things right, Mark. You're just desperate to get back to your comfortable life. But guess what? That life doesn't exist anymore. Not for you. His face fell, and he took a step back, as if my words were physical blows. Milena, please. Save it. I cut him off sharply. I want you to leave. Don't come back here. We're done. Forever. Mark stood there for a second longer, his hope visibly crumbling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Returning to my book, I smiled to myself. The quiet of the house wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, a stark contrast to the chaos that once reigned here. I was finally at peace, living life on my terms, and no bouquet of flowers or sweet talk could disrupt that. I was truly, finally free.